Thanks so much for joining us on our Arise Church YouTube channel. We exist so that you can experience God, and we hope you do experience His presence and His power through this message. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to us on Instagram at My Arise Church and find us on YouTube at the same handle, My Arise Church.
Hey, what's up, Risers? How you guys doing this morning? Woo! Good to see you guys. Welcome to Arise. Welcome everybody online as well. If you're new to our church, my name is Brent. I get the privilege of being your lead pastor, and we're going to continue to experience the Lord in the next few moments together, and God's going to do some awesome things. We always want to celebrate as we get started. This morning, love is in the air, Valentine's Day on Friday. Yeah. And so I wanted to do something kind of unique. We don't do this all the time in our church, but I'm just curious, who in this room has been married the longest? Married the longest. All right, so Pastor Ada and I have been married for 25 years coming up this August. So let's start there. So if you've been married more than 25 years, raise your hand and keep it up. All right, keep it up until I get done with you. All right, so more than 30 years. More than 35 years. We got some hands going like this. I don't know. I don't know if we're going to make it to 30. No, I'm just teasing. More than 40 years. More than 40. All right, we got a few. More than 50. Over 50. 50. Anybody over? All right, let's go. 51. 52. 53. 54. 55. 56. We got winners over here. Oh! You guys, run down here real fast as you can. You guys are so Lila Marie's. I'm going to run to you. We're going to just do it the other way. You can at least stand up, though. Stand up. All right, how many years?
64.
64 years. Woo! Come on, church. Come on, church. Let's get a photo for Pastor Johnny. 64 years. Well, this is not, you've been doing this all this time just for this, but we're giving you a date night so you guys can go to Outback or Carrabba's or somewhere and enjoy a great dinner on us. We honor you. We celebrate you. 64 years. Yeah. Amen. Thank you. Love you guys. That's the record in our church so far, because it was 61 years in the last service. 64 years. I'm going to do good if I live 64 years without Ada killing me. Come on, somebody. 64 years. Man, that's a lot of ups and downs. That's a beautiful, beautiful testament to marriage and love and commitment. I love that. About a year and a half ago, in the middle of 2023, Harrison Buckner, the kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, we won't hold either one of those two things against him, but the kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs is giving the commencement address at his alma mater, Georgia Tech. And as he's given this commencement address, he says some things that are to some degree, causes some friction, and everybody doesn't know how to understand. It's going to cause some friction in this room even today as I share it, because it's going to sound very countercultural. And he's standing up and he starts talking about something we're all very familiar with, anxiety and loneliness and all of these type of things that are growing, especially since the pandemic. And he's going to give an answer or a solution for what actually cures these things that's not the one that you're accustomed to hearing. And so, with that being said, turn your attention to the screens and watch an excerpt from this message.
Our culture is suffering. We all see it. It doesn't matter which political persuasion you sit on or whether you are a person of deep faith or not. Anyone with eyes can see that something is off. Studies have shown one of the many negative effects of the pandemic is that a lot of young adults feel a sense of loneliness, anxiety, and depression, despite technology that has connected us more than ever before. It would seem the more connected people are to one another, the more they feel alone. I'm not sure the root of this, but at least I can offer one controversial antidote that I believe will have a lasting impact for generations to come. Get married and start a family. Wow. I will say this is the most important ring I have right here. Having kicked the game-winning field goal in both the AFC Championship and the Super Bowl, I have received a great deal of praise for these successes. They just announced that this Super Bowl was the most watched football game of all time, and yet all of this happiness is temporary. And the truth is, none of these accomplishments mean anything compared to the happiness I have found in my marriage and in starting a family. My confidence as a husband and father, and yes, even as a football player, is rooted in my marriage with my wife, as we leave our mark on future generations by the children we bring into the world. How much greater of a legacy can anyone leave than that?
Wow. That's pretty countercultural, but it actually may be accurate. So there's a sociologist by the name of Dr. Brad Wilcox, a genius of a man, actually graduated with his PhD from Princeton, currently teaches at the University of Virginia, who wrote this particular book. Last year it came out in 2024 called Get Married. Get Married. Look at your neighbor and say, get married. He is a sociologist, so he studies societies. Some of that was really weird because that was your spouse, but he studies societies, and he's taken years and years and years and years of research and packed it all into one book, all about how marriage affects your life and how you are better or worse from marriage, what is true about marriage, what is untrue about marriage. And by and large, throughout the book, he actually takes so much that we've been told all of our lives about marriage and actually blows it up. In fact, he would say things like, American culture has sold you a lie about what marriage is. You see, we're part of American culture that has taught us through television and movies and radio that this is what marriage looks like. And we've been told all of our lives this is what it is, to such a degree that we actually start to believe it. But when you do the science, when you do the research, you actually find out that it's a little bit different than what he's writing. And so he starts to write at length about the direct correlation between the rise of unhappiness and people who are not happy with their life and the demise of marriage, and how the two actually connect. Despite the fact he's a kicker and despite the fact he's with the Chiefs, Harrison Buckner might have been onto something. And he writes in this book, and I'm going to quote quite a bit in this message, he writes this: living for ourselves or our jobs or our own happiness and success is not very likely to bring us to a destination filled with meaning and happiness, whether we are men or women. He goes on to say, he has found that giving ourselves to others, especially our spouses and families, is the path most likely to lead to a meaningful and generally happy life for most of us. That's not his opinion. That's the research. And he goes on to say repeatedly throughout the book in different ways, he says this quote, this is one of the quotes, but throughout the book he says, marriage is the most important predictor to happiness in life, as well as overcoming depression, anxiety, despair, gloom. It's actually marriage is the number one predictor. Well, that's not what you've been told your whole life. That's not what you've been understanding it to be. And I want to be clear, when we're talking about these things, these are statistics, and there's always anomalies in statistics. There's some that are outside of the statistical norm. And it does not mean that if you're not married, you can't be happy. That's not what it means at all, especially if you've chosen a life of singleness as a gift of singleness. But so often when we're looking at a younger crowd, raise your hand if you're under 40. A lot of this message is for you, okay? That's a lot of y'all. We got a young church of a bunch of munchkins. So this is a lot of us in this room. I can't put myself in that category anymore, but a lot of us in this room, because we've been sold a bill of lies about marriage and what it actually means to us. And so we got to be very cautious with this, because marriage becomes this important predictor. So you can be single and be happy. I'm not saying you can't. But if you're under 40, what starts to happen, because the world we grew up in with social media and the internet and all this, is it becomes a very selfish world. And so the reason we're not getting married if you're younger tends to be because I want my needs met, and I want this, and when you have that mindset, you will always be unhappy. We'll get into why in just a minute, but you're always going to be unhappy. Now, this is not what you've heard all of your life, because you know marriage is the old ball and chain, right? Marriage is, that's not it at all. Marriage is just not, I jumped ahead of myself in my notes. I'm sorry. I got to go back. It's my third time doing this message, so let me go back. The statistics say, the numbers say, the math says, the research, the science, okay? The science says that general happiness increases by 30 points simply by being married. And that's a 50-year longitudinal study of people. 50 years, just being married actually increases your happiness by 50 points. Parental status and happiness, that when you are married and have children, you are even more happy. All the thriving metrics that you would say is a thriving adult goes up. Communities are better communities when you have marriages within the communities. They have better economies. They have better mobility. In other words, they can travel more. They are safer. They are less depressed. All because they have strong marriages. In fact, check this out. Married men on average make between 10 and 30% more money than unmarried men. You know why? Because a married man has responsibility and can't just quit his job. A married man needs to climb the ladder a little bit. He needs to put himself out there a little bit. But if he's going to leave one job, he's going to take another job before he leaves the first one. He's much less likely to get fired if he's a married man. And this message is so countercultural because, as I started to say a minute ago, we've all been taught that marriage is the old ball and chain. Marriage stinks. Marriage ruins your life. It's old-fashioned. Marriage ruins sex. We've heard that all of our life. Marriage actually ruins you financially. Marriage is a game that everyone loses. If you're younger in this room, you've probably heard for a long time that monogamy itself is unnatural. Therefore, marriage is unnatural. The whole thing is messed up. It's just the whole thing is messed up. In fact, they say there's three rings. There's the marriage ring, or the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and then the suffering. That's what marriage is, right? One lady said, I was looking for the ideal, it became an ordeal, and now I want a new deal. It's like the pastor who was doing a graveside funeral, and he's out at the cemetery doing a graveside funeral, and people are clearing out and they're leaving, and he sees over a few tombstones away, there's a man who's weeping at this other tombstone, a man he doesn't know, and he thought to himself, this is a ministry moment, I could go over and pray for this guy, encourage this guy. So he starts walking over to this other tombstone, and this man is in front of the tombstone just weeping and crying, and he keeps shouting, why did you have to die? Why did you have to die? So the pastor comes and puts his arm around him and says, hey, did you know the deceased? How did you know them? He said, no, I never knew them. It was my first wife's husband. My wife's first husband. I said that wrong. My wife's first husband. You get the idea. That's what we're taught. All of our, like, what? Marriage ruins your life, right? In fact, we've been taught it so well that if the current data stays and remains the same, 1 out of every 3 young adults in this room will not marry. 1 out of every 4 young adults in this room will not have children. Since 1970, the marriage rate in the United States has decreased by 65%. Wow, that's crazy. So what I want to show you today is very countercultural to what you have always heard, but it's actually the truth. And it's the truth that it's not about being selfish in what I get. It's actually the truth that you find true happiness in what you give to somebody else. Maybe you've been lied to, and maybe not only the Bible says that, not only a preacher, but the data, the research, the science actually shows that too. Which is why the writer of Hebrews would say in Hebrews 13:4 that we should honor marriage. Marriage should be honored by all. But instead, we're dishonoring marriage. Instead, we're dishonoring. So we need marriage. We need marriage. Why do we need marriage? Well, there's all kinds of reasons. Marriage is good for you. It's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. Marriage is good for you. And there's all kinds of reasons why it's good for you. Number one is because you need to learn how to get along with somebody who's not you. There's an emotional healthiness that happens when you're tied to somebody and committed to somebody who doesn't always agree with you. I don't know when and how, but I was telling some of our team earlier, and I said it in the first service, like we're gonna have a series at some point about the future of AI and how we respond to the future of AI. Because one of the reasons why people are not gonna get married in the future is because they're essentially giving their lives over to AI relationships that are not real. And that's weird if you're over 40 in this room, but they give themselves to this. And one of the many issues with that is that the AI is always going to tell you what you want to hear. You're never going to become emotionally healthy until you can have some good, healthy friction and figure out how to get along with somebody who doesn't always agree with you, but AI is always going to agree with you. We got to be very, very cautious. You need to know this too. If you're in this room and you're like, man, my marriage stinks, it is horrible. The data shows this, and every Christian, you should memorize this one quote, if nothing else. The data shows this, that 2/3 of marriages that are unhealthy or unhappy will be happy in 5 years if they just stick together. I'm gonna say that again. 2/3 of marriages that are unhappy will be happy in 5 years if they'll stay together. Now, that still leaves a third. But the majority actually work through it, they grow together, and you actually become better on the other side of it. We could look around marriages in this room and get testimony after testimony after testimony of marriages in this room that are that story where people could come up and say, I was done, I was ready to quit, and now it's 5 years later, and now I'm happy and I'm fulfilled and I'm blessed inside of this marriage. And so what we have to see is this idea of marriage is beautiful and wonderful, but we have been sold a bill of lies because we want to make it selfish about us when it comes to love instead of about the other person. And the paradox of happiness works like this. The more we try to make ourselves happy, the less happy we are. This is just true. And we live in a world that's like, make it about you, make it about you. It's all about me, it's my career, it's my job, it's my thing, and I gotta be happy. But true happiness is not actually found in trying to make yourself happy. It's actually found in trying to make somebody else happy. And when you do that, you actually find happiness in return. That's how it's meant to function, which we shouldn't be surprised by. Because St. Augustine would go all the way back to saying that through true love, like love nowadays is about us. It's like what I get out of it, right? We write marriage vows and things, and nowadays the modern marriage vows sometimes that we write are not commitments. They're just what I get out of it, right? So I love you because you make me feel so good. I love you because you were there for me in the hard time. And the wedding vow is not even a vow. It's just a reason. It's like selfish. It's like, you do this for me. But what happens when they don't do that for you anymore? I'm not against writing your own wedding vows. I think that's a wonderful thing. But a wedding vow is a commitment that says for better, for worse, for richer, for poor. A wedding vow is about a commitment. Now, we got to be very cautious because if we live in a world where it's telling us all of our lives that to be happy, you need to make yourself happy, just be you, make yourself happy, make it self-focused, you're always going to find unhappiness. Now, that's not popular, but it's true, and the data points it out. Now, we shouldn't be surprised by that because we've been quoting a verse for 2 weeks straight that fits right with this whole series called First Things First that says this, Matthew 6:33, Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these things will be added to you, right? Seek ye first. If there's a first, well, there must be a second, and maybe a third, and maybe a fourth. In other words, there's a sequential order in the way things are designed to operate. There's a natural order in God's system of the way things were designed to operate. In fact, you grew up, some of us, if you're a little bit older, grew up saying this phrase, which kind of helped you with the natural order, whether we lived it or not. We grew up saying the phrase, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes a baby in a baby carriage, right? Yeah, you grew up saying that. Then all the little girls, first comes love, then comes marriage, right? You grew up saying that. And then we grew up and we didn't live any of it, but we grew up saying it. Why? Because there is an order. There's a sequential way that it's supposed to happen. It's kind of like this. Like spaghetti is almost a universal food. Everybody in this room has cooked spaghetti at some point or eaten spaghetti. Spaghetti is like universal all around the world. And in order for spaghetti to work, you have to cook it, but you got to cook it in the sequential order or make sure it's all cooked before you put it together. You can't pour ragu spaghetti sauce, and I'm sorry for all you chefs who are offended that I even brought this in. Because there's always somebody, you're like, I make my own spaghetti sauce, and it's the greatest spaghetti sauce. Sorry, this is just what Publix had. You can't just take ragu and pour it over the top of these hard noodles and eat it and call it spaghetti. That would be gross. There's a natural order. You got to put some water inside of a pot. You got to let it boil. You got to put the spaghetti in there. You got to let the spaghetti sit in there for a little while. You got to let it, get all gooey and soft. And then you got to strain it, and you got to pour the spaghetti sauce on it. But the spaghetti sauce also needs to be heated up because you don't want no cold spaghetti sauce on your food. That's not going to be good. It's a simple order, but it's the right order. And if you do each step in the process, you got something pretty delicious. You get you some good spaghetti. But if you don't do each step or out of order or don't finish each step, what you get is pretty gross. Are y'all with me? Are with you? So what is the sequential order that God designed with relationships? Well, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes a baby, in a baby carriage. So let's see if we can break this down a little bit, all right? So seek ye first the kingdom of God. So there's got to be a first. So marriage has to come first. So let me give you some thoughts and hopefully some wisdom that's going to save you from a multitude of troubles for some of you in this room. Number one, marriage first, then cohabitation. Okay? If you get cohabitation first, you're trying to eat some nasty noodles that haven't been boiled yet, okay? Now, I know this is countercultural. I know this is weird, but believe it or not, this is the best way. And there's always somebody that comes back and they're like, well, you got to test drive the car before you buy it. You got to kick the tires, right? I'm like, come on. First of all, she's not a Buick, all right? She's not a Mazda. She's not a Kia, okay? You ain't got to test drive it before you buy it. I don't want to be all graphic. Parents, you can hide your kids' ears if you want me to, but I'm just going to tell you this, okay? If he's got an Audi and she's got an innie, it'll work together. You ain't got to try it out first. You ain't got to see if it's going to work. Okay? I'm saving you from a lot of trouble. It'll work, all right? It'll work. God designed it to work. It'll work. But she's not a Kia. You ain't got to test drive her, okay? You ain't got to test drive him, all right? And you do realize this too. Like if you go buy a Kia, you can test drive it at the dealership or whatever. But you do know if you go buy like a Lamborghini, you can't just go test drive a Lamborghini. Why? Because that thing's too expensive. It's too valuable. It's worth too much. You better buy that thing before you actually get in and drive it. Some of you are treating her like she's a Kia instead of treating her like she's a Lamborghini. Or him. Okay? Yeah, you ain't got to test drive it first. And so what does this mean practically? All right, letter A if you're taking notes. Sex was designed for marriage. Sex was meant for marriage. Sex is awesome inside of the fireplace where the fire's meant to be, but if the fire's not in the fireplace, it can burn the whole house down, right? That's why we get passages, there's many of them in the New Testament, but 1 Corinthians 6 says, flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temple of the Holy Spirit who's in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You are bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. 1 Thessalonians 4 says, it is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control their own body in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God. Sex is awesome. All right, I'm going to really mess you up. I'm going to tell you what the data shows, not the Bible, not the preacher. This is the data. This is the science, okay? Sex is better in marriage than it is outside of marriage. I know the radio won't tell you that. I know the TV show won't tell you that. I know the movies won't tell you that. Look it up for yourself. People in marriages have more sex and better sex than people who are not in marriages. Can y'all handle that? Like, we're a church that's going to be real. I don't know if y'all know us. Some of y'all are new. Like, we're just going to have these conversations sometimes. Check this out. All right? Couples who attend church will have sex over 33% more often than couples who don't attend church. I said that in my Saturday service, and one person came up to me afterwards and said, I'm bringing my wife to every service. Every service. Like, we got 6 services over the weekend at our church. He's like, I'm bringing them to all of them, and we're going to Falkenberg for a 7th service. We're going to all of them. It's true. And I know every television show says, well, those Christians, they're all uptight. That is just not true. And the data, people like Dr. Wilcox, and really everybody, because all the data points this direction, all says the same thing, right? Sex is better inside of marriage than it is outside of marriage, and all the data points to that. So you don't need to cohabitate before you get married. Secondly, you need commitment before cohabitation, and that's why it's so important that we don't cohabitate early. You need commitment before cohabitation. All right, this is the problem with cohabitation. Dr. Brad Wilcox would say it this way, but all of the experts agree. The strongest predictor of high-quality marriages is perceived partner commitment. The strongest predictor of a great marriage is that there's a commitment, okay? Here's the problem. Whenever you move in with somebody, it's usually more like, yeah, let's try this out. We're not really committed. We're just sort of, it's like stick your toe in the water, you know what I mean? Let's just see if it works. Sometimes it's not even about, sometimes it's like, we just can't afford it, so let's move in together so we can share the bills. And it's not really a commitment. It's like sticking your toe in the water. So you kind of slide into this thing of like being together, and now you're living together. And then you live together long enough, and then it's like, well, we've been together for a long time now. Maybe we should get married. Well, that's just the next logical step. And so you sort of slide into marriage, but you never actually have a moment that you're like, genuinely, I'm committed to you till death do us part, for richer, for poor, for better, for worse. And that causes all kinds of troubles. It's like, I'm going to be with you as long as I feel good about it. But that's not what love is, because love is about the other person. It's about pursuing and taking care of the other person's needs above your own, okay? Now, this is something else you're not going to hear in the world very often, but you can look it up for yourself if you don't believe me. Cohabitation increases the likelihood of divorce. Now hear me. Not by a little bit, by a lot. Well, we got to try it out and see if it works first. We got to make sure that we're sexually compatible. We got to make sure we can get along. No, it almost always actually ends up later on. If you cohabitate before you get married, hear me. It's between 50 and 80%, depending on which research you find, between 50 and 80% more likely to get divorced after marriage if you live together first. Because you're putting the spaghetti on the plate and it's not cooked yet. There's a natural order, there's a design by God, and somehow we think we're too cute to do that, and we don't want to wait to actually boil to boil it. And so the spaghetti doesn't get boiled, and so now it's hard, and you're like, what? This isn't working. Are you with me? I know this is not popular, but it's true. All right, number 2, if you're taking notes. Marriage first, then children. Marriage first, then children. All of these sort of have 2 main sub-themes underneath them, but here you got to start with this one. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes a baby and a baby carriage. You got to understand this. Children do best when they have married parents. It's just simple. In fact, this is almost intuitive that we sort of know this, but in every single category, economically, they'll make more money. Educationally, they'll have better education. They'll do better in school. Behaviorally, they'll have better behavioral patterns. They're less likely to go to jail. They'll have better mental health. Just in every single category, children do better when they're in a married family. Now, this doesn't mean if you're not married, if you're a single mom, you're rocking it. I appreciate that. It doesn't mean your kids are doomed. But I'm talking to people so you don't end up in that category so that you can do better by your kids. Now hear this. This is where it gets really crazy and really nuts. He says this, and I'm quoting, "The research tells us that children who are exposed to high levels of family instability, and especially to unrelated males in the household, are more likely to end up physically, sexually, and emotionally abused and or neglected." He goes on to say, and I'm quoting, "Living with a step-parent," listen. Living with a step-parent has turned out to be the most powerful predictor of severe childhood abuse. Now, I'm not saying if you're a step-parent, you're an abuser. I'm a step-parent, okay? I'm not saying that if you're a step-parent that you're abusive. I'm not saying that if you're living with somebody that they're going to automatically abuse, because statistics don't always work that way. There's always outliers within statistics, but it's more likely. Why? Because we're getting things out of order. We're not doing it in the order God designed it. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes a baby in a baby carriage. Okay? So recognize that. Now again, if you're a single mom in the room, there are ways to break these, and one of the ways of breaking these type of statistics is actually getting plugged into a church so you have a community of faith around you. So don't think like it's all doomed, my child is doomed. Listen, your child's not doomed if you're a single mom. I'm just trying to make these statistics very real and very raw, especially for the younger crowd, so they can not make some of the mistakes that some of the older crowd made. Are you with me? Okay, hear me when I say this. The best gift that you can give your kids is a healthy marriage. I know we live in a world right now where we're like, we got to give our kids the very best. We're gonna give them in private school education and get them to the best college and what have you. Or my kid's gonna be the next Derek Jeter, so I'm gonna chase him all over the state of Florida and travel baseball or whatever. I don't know what it is for you, but we always want to give our best to our kids. It's what we do. And I am telling you, the greatest gift you will ever give your child is a healthy marriage. That's it. In every single category, yeah. In every single category, they will do better if you simply have a good marriage. That means you cannot make your life about your kids. Uh-oh, that's another cultural norm I'm stepping on. Marriage is not about your kids. Marriage is about each other. Your kids come second to the marriage. It's kind of like you all fly, and if you've flown very much, you completely ignore the steward or the stewardess that starts with the safety instructions, right? If you've flown more than twice, all of a sudden you got your earbuds in, you ain't paying attention to anything they say. They could say the wheels are about to fall off this plane, you'd be lost. You're just like, whatever. But they always say that safety instruction, and they say, in the event of an emergency, the mask will drop from the ceiling above. And they always say this, make sure you put it on yourself first and your children second. I know that's counterintuitive, especially to moms. Counterintuitive, but you actually have to deal with yourself and then your kids. The best thing you can do for your kids is not make your life about your kids. Ask Abraham and Sarah about that. They had a promised child and they couldn't wait to have it, and she got so excited that she ended up putting Abraham with a concubine and creating a whole nother nation out of this seed because she got too caught up in the child instead of the relationship. Listen, the greatest gift you can give your kids. In every single category, they will be more successful, at least statistically. And it's not a perfect rule, but statistically, you are setting them up for success by actually loving your spouse, by going on dates, by holding their hand in the car, by praying for them. Like Brody is 9 years old right now, and Ada and I are touchy-feely. 5 love languages, our second is both touch, physical. So, and we're both touchy-feely. So we're always holding hands. I'm always putting my arm around her. She's in the kitchen, I give her a squeeze. I'm kissing her on the back of the head or something. It's not always sexual. It's just, we're just touchy, right? Don't look at me like that. This is what made our marriage work for 25 years. She still lets me touch her. So it's always hilarious though, because Brody's 9 years old and he will lose his ever-loving mind. And it's like, I can touch Ada's shoulder, and he's like, yeah, that's so disgusting. Would you stop that? We haven't even done nothing. He just because he's 9 years old, right? That's what a 9-year-old does. But what he doesn't realize is I'm actually teaching him what a healthy marriage looks like. Because when he's 30 years old or 25 or 35 or whatever, and he's married and he's got that wife, I want his hands on his wife, not some other woman, not some other place. The best gift that you can give your kids is a healthy marriage. Healthy marriage. Healthy marriage. Don't make it about the kids. Be cautious. You got to keep those date nights. You got to keep that time together. The kids won't like it, but they'll love it later. Why come you guys get to go to Outback? Because we're your parents. Listen, I tell my kids, my relationship with your mom is more valuable and more important to me than my relationship with you. I love you, but I have to live with her for the rest of my life. I can kick you out of the house in a few years. Come on. I heard a crazy story one time. I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard this story of a couple that was 95 years old. 95 years old, and they go and they're getting a divorce. And they go before the judge getting a divorce, and the judge is like, you're 95 years old. Why are you getting a divorce? And they said, we didn't want to get a divorce while our kids were alive, so we waited for our kids to die before we got a divorce. I don't know if that's true or story or not, but it's kind of crazy. Listen, it's not healthy for your kids. So recognize that. The greatest gift you can give your kids is a healthy marriage. Let me take this a little bit step further. Especially for the under 40s in this room, there's always a drive when we're young that we want to leave our mark on the world. We want to make a difference. It's natural, it's human, it's good. It's not bad at all, but we want to leave our mark. And so we get really caught up in careers and how we're going to do this, this benevolence thing and help people out in some certain way or some humanitarian effort or whatever. And I just want you to hear this. The greatest mark that you will leave on this earth is your children. That is the greatest mark. And you know what? It's a great mark for good or bad. It's going to leave a mark. It's going to make the world better or worse. So you invest in your marriage. That's a way of investing in your children that leave a mark on this earth. And Harrison Buckner, the kicker, said it. The greatest mark you can leave is actually with your kids. With your kids. Don't be that person that has everything else but loses their children in the process. Don't be that one that focuses on all the wrong places. This is why Psalm 127 would say, children are a heritage from the Lord. Offspring a reward from him like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. You want children because you can pull them out and send them out. They're going to leave a mark that's greater than anything you can ever leave. I love when I preach on some things like this because the younger crowd are like, oh, wow, that's interesting. In the older crowd, I can look around and they're going, because you've seen it. You've experienced it. Proverbs 22 would say, start a child off in the way they should go, and even when they're old, they're not turned from it. Your job as a parent is to have that marriage, but to also let that marriage guide your kids in the direction they need to go so that that mark that's left through them is a positive mark on the world. All right, number 3. What's the order? What else comes first? Marriage first and then career. Marriage first and then career. Now, this one is really, I answered a lot of questions about this one after this last service from people in the audience. Some of this is from the research of the book. Well, this is from the research of the book. But Dr. Wilcox is not only talking about this from the perspective of a researcher, but as a college professor dealing with young people. And what he has discovered is that the dishonoring of marriage has allowed us to start honoring careers and replacing marriage with our career, okay? So what happens so often is that we are now 35 years old, 40 years old because we focused our entire life on a career and we never got married, and it's starting to cause some issues. So for instance, he talks about what's happening at the university where he teaches, but then he starts talking about polls. So just listen to this. I'm quoting from the book. One recent poll found that 32% of young adults ages 18 to 40 think that marriage is essential to living a fulfilling life, okay? So 32% marriage is essential for a fulfilling life, compared to 64%, literally double that, who think education is essential, and 75% who think making a good living or making a lot of money is essential. And this is compounded by parents. It's reinforced by them. When they're polled, 88% of the parents believe it is important for their child to be financially independent in order to have a good, fulfilling life and have a career. And only 21% of the parents said it's actually important for them to have get married and start a family. Isn't that interesting? And that's the culture that we're involved with. And marriage is evil. Marriage is ball and chain. Marriage is going to ruin you. Why? Because that's what we're taught all of our lives. So why would you not put career over a marriage? Now, there's always outliers. Statistics are not 100%, but hear me, okay? Let me tell you practically what happens. Somebody came to me after the Saturday service and was telling me a personal story about this very thing. Let me tell you what happens. I put my career first. I'm all about my career. I'm going to make money, and then I'll get married. So now I'm 35, 37 years old, and I start to date, okay? You know who the dating market is? People who've been divorced, already have kids, I'm not saying that's 100% true, but the dating market is not the same that it was when you were 25 or in college. It's just, y'all should be thanking me like I'm throwing y'all some bones. I know this is weird, but I'm helping some of y'all out. I'm gonna save you from a multitude of problems in this message. Because if you're not careful, you're like, I just gotta get a career. But the problem is the career probably is not as fulfilling as you've been taught it is. And marriage and children is actually more fulfilling. And you can still have a career. We're not anti-career. One of the people I talked to after one of the services said she was in college. She was wanting to be a professor, and she was in college, and she started talking to her professors and realizing that all of her female professors were all still single, but they're all 35, 40, 45 years old, and they're all still single. And so she started talking to them, and she realized, hey, there's something more valuable here than just becoming a professor and teaching. So she found somebody, got married, and then finished her degree, and now she's a professor. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's just sometimes we are overemphasizing a career to the dishonoring of marriage, which is actually where you will generally find the most fulfilling part of your life. You with me? Yep. Okay, so don't be cautious of that. And then secondly, I would say don't marry your career when you're married to your spouse. That also happens. Maybe even a little bit more common, that while you're married to your spouse, you are going to spend all your time at the office, all your time in your career. No, you got to spend time with your spouse. You are married to them, not your career, right? Mark 8, Jesus would say, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul, right? What good is it for a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his spouse, forfeit his marriage? And we've seen this repeatedly within society, whether it's the old Cats in the Cradle song that talks about it from back in the day, or somebody like Steve Jobs, who obviously left his mark on the world but lost his first child in the middle of it because of he was spending so much time at the office and working, constantly had strained relationships with his family. Or Thomas Edison, the great inventor, who certainly left his mark on the world but lost his family in the middle of it. So many things like that, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can still leave your mark on the world. You can still have your career. You can still do something great and keep your marriage first, right? C.S. Lewis is a great example of this, one of the great authors of all time who wrote some of the most astounding, beautiful books of all times, and even Christian apologetic stuff that he did. Once he got married, he put his emphasis on the marriage first and the career second, and still had a great career. Somebody like Billy Graham, who's traveling all over the world spreading the gospel, but yet his marriage and his children was always first. Somebody like Truett Cathy, who started Chick-fil-A, and one of the reasons he refused to be open on Sundays is because he said, I want to take my family to church. It wasn't just that Sunday's the Sabbath. It was a personal decision that I'm leading my family. I want to be there with my family. And he still created and left his mark on the earth. And praise God, we're getting a Chick-fil-A right down the street. Get more applause for that than anything else. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Listen, careers are not wrong. Don't hear that. I want you to have a career. I want you to leave your mark. I want you to do something great. But recognize if we're not careful, we will overemphasize career and underemphasize marriage. And generally speaking, statistically speaking, your marriage is what's going to actually make you happy and fulfill you. Your career is probably not. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25. Paul's writing, and he says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Christ's sacrificial love for the church becomes the way that we should be sacrificially loving our spouse. That he would not be selfish, but be giving. And that becomes it. That's what love is. I know you've been taught all of your life, love is about me. It's about how you make me feel. Love is not just a feeling, it's a commitment to the better of the other person. And that's what this message at the root of it all is because we've grown up in a society and cultural that made love selfish. And so as soon as my needs are not being met, I can just leave. It's deeper than that. It's pursuing the good of someone else. So the question becomes, if love is pursuing the best interests of another person, and God gave us a natural order for fulfilling that, are we going to submit ourselves to his natural order, or are we going to do it our way? Because this is not just preacher talk. This is not just Bible talk. This is what the science says. And you can watch all your TV shows and have all your music and all the television and movies, everything will tell you something different. But the data shows the truth. You know, leaders confront the brutal facts. This is what it shows. It doesn't mean you can't be okay the other way. But statistically, you're far less likely when you do it out of God's order. Are y'all with me? So that's where the confrontation comes. Will you do it in God's design or not? God's design or not? So I mentioned it earlier. Pastor Ada and I, have been married for 25 years this August. We're going to Hawaii for our anniversary. Whoop, whoop. Yep. We've been planning this for a long time. We were actually supposed to go for our 20th, but that was COVID. And so this has been like probably 8 years in the making that we're going to go to Hawaii. And but we're going to go to Hawaii, and we are not taking our kids. Praise God. Because it's an anniversary trip. And so I can stand up here and I can tell you this genuinely and thoughtfully. And I'm not saying it because she's in the room. This is not brownie points. This is true, okay? She's my best friend. I would not be here on multiple levels if she were not in my life. She makes everything better. There's also been moments that she wants to strangle me, and I want to kick her out. I've heard many preachers, they stand up and they're like, my wife was going to leave, and I went outside and I removed the carburetor so she couldn't start the car. I'm like, I've gone outside and started the car so she could leave. I don't know nothing about removing something. Because marriage is not always easy. It's not always easy. But the joy of my life is not just in my kids. It's not in my career. I mean, career-wise, our church is amazing and beautiful. It's the joy of my life. It's actually right here. When I'm not the pastor of this church anymore, she's going to be there. When I'm not the parent of my kids because they're adults and they don't look at me the same way, she's going to be here. This has to be the highest priority. I mean, besides God, obviously, this has to be the highest priority in my life. Now, hear me. Now, this is important. This is going to help a lot of you right here. We did not start right. When I met Ada, she already had a child. Both of us come from promiscuous backgrounds. Both of us had radical salvation stories. And we had to hit a reset. I don't know who I'm talking to in this room. There's some of you, you just need a reset. It's time to throw out the old stuff, bring in some new stuff, and start over and do it in God's way. And go, all right, I admit the old way, it wasn't really working. I need to reset. And so Ada and I both had to do a reset because we had already gotten out of order. And you start back. All right, I'm going to reset. We're going to try to do it the best that we can in God's design, God's order, so that we can actually get the outcome that God designed us to get. And we can actually find that fulfilling life. So for you, and we do this every once in a while in our church. It's not terribly uncommon. For you, you might be living with somebody, and God may be convicting you, and you may need to call me, go get a marriage license, and we will perform a wedding in my office this week, or one of our pastors. There ain't nothing wrong with that. And then there's always somebody that's like, but I'm Latin and we have to have a big wedding. Do the big wedding in 6 months, but get married this week. I'm just being real with you. Make a commitment. Don't just slide into this thing. Yeah, we kind of like each other. No, make a commitment that's genuine and real. And I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it looks like for you. But there's the question that's on the screen. Will you surrender to God's natural order? Because I believe that God has a good plan for your life. But that doesn't mean anything if we don't actually align ourselves into his plan. I can have a great car that I want to give you, but if you don't come to me, submit yourself, and get into the car, I can't give it to you. God has a great plan for your life, but you got to do things in his order, which is often countercultural. Would you stand up with me around the room? God is love, we are told, and God loves you and I. And again, love is not about selfishness, it's about wanting the good for someone else, for the other person. And God would love you so much that he would actually sacrifice himself for your good. And the basis of the gospel is that through the death of Jesus Christ, you can now have a relationship with God. You can experience heaven on earth. Some people get all caught up in going to heaven when you die. Yeah, that's cool, that's awesome, that's part of the gospel. But the greatest part of the gospel is not going to heaven when you die. It's actually getting heaven here to earth to you now. That's far more valuable to you in the present than just heaven when you die. And some of you need heaven in your marriage. You need heaven in your kids. You need heaven in your mind and your soul. And you can have that through accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, which means, as we just talked about, doing things in God's order, not my order.
God is doing so much here at Arise Church, and we want you to be a part of it. Stay connected with us on our YouTube channel, Facebook, and Instagram, and wherever you can find us online at My Arise Church, and we'll see you next week.